My name is Victoria Esquivel. Today is Friday, November 14th. I am visiting with former alumnus Dr. Jerry Vannatta, or Vanetta? Vannatta, okay, in Oklahoma City University's Delaney Brown Library. And this interview is for the Campus Legends Oral History Project. Thank you, Dr. Vannatta, for agreeing to talk with us today about your experiences at OCU in the 1960s. So, what would be some pertinent background information we should know about you in order to get a better picture of the kind of man you were when coming to OCU? I know it's a long question.
Man would be a misnomer when
Really?
I got to OCU. I was but a boy. I grew up in the panhandle of Oklahoma in a small town by the name of Keys, K-E-Y-E-S. Small high school, 21 in my high school class. I was a farm boy, and I came to OCU because I grew up in the Methodist Church. OCU was associated with the Methodist Church, and so my attention was drawn to it. And then I was impressed with the physics department here at the time, and I wanted to study physics, so that's why I came.
And how would you describe yourself at that age, first personality?
I was described by others as rigid. I probably wouldn't have seen myself as rigid at the time, but I sort of knew what I knew and wasn't very interested in changing my mind about anything. And so when I got here, it was like being thrown into a cauldron of change for me.
So how did your parents feel about you coming from?
They loved the fact that I was coming to OCU because although it was the most expensive school in the state and we didn't have a lot of money, I was able to get loans and scholarships to attend, and they were really pleased with the fact that I was going to such a religious school. Mm-hmm. It turned out not to be such a religious school, but that was their idea at the time.
And were they excited about your major for physics?
Yeah, they weren't really pushing me one way or the other. They said study what you like and study what you love, and you'll probably do better doing that. And so I had chosen physics, and that's what I came to study.
So what originally made you want to come to OCU, other than Methodist?
I think, having grown up in such a small school, I was a bit intimidated by large schools. So the small size of the university was appealing to me. Small class size was appealing to me. And at the time, OCU had two things that really attracted me. One was a thing called the Great Plans Scholar Program, which was a program where OCU gave full scholarships to students who, in today's vernacular, would probably be considered National Merit finalists. These are really high-scoring, high-producing high school students. And OCU was attracting these students and giving them a full ride. They also had some sort of window dressing with this program, saying that they were associated with MIT in Boston. Now, that impressed me as a high school student. I, in 4 years at OCU, never met anyone on this campus who came from MIT, nor did I know anyone on this campus who went to Boston. But nonetheless, it was sort of some window dressing for that program. There were a lot of very bright students here in the late 60s because of that program. The second thing that I liked a lot, besides the size and this Great Plan Scholars Program, was that the physics department was somewhat advanced. The beginning physics course was calculus based, and was our ability to study deeply into physics in the undergraduate curriculum there was more opportunity than there was at the other two large state universities.
Okay. So your major was physics. So what was your mindset coming into college?
My mindset was that of a very conservative young farm boy from rural Oklahoma. I thought very much like my parents thought. I was sort of a parrot of my parents' thinking when I got here.
Were you excited for anything specifically?
You know, I was just excited to experience something outside of that small town and that small school. I didn't know what to be excited for. One of the things I was really excited for was that there would be more than 5 or 6 girls to choose among. And so, yeah, that was exciting to me.
Okay, did you live on campus?
I did. I lived in Harris Hall my freshman year, and I lived in Banning Hall my sophomore, junior, and senior years.
How was dorm living?
It was wonderful.
Yeah. Did you have a meal plan?
I did. I ate all my meals in the cafeteria.
Were you involved on campus?
I was. I am sort of a joiner, and I was a member of Blue Key. I was one of the founding members of a social fraternity my junior year. It was Phi Alpha fraternity, which later became an SAE chapter at OCU, and so those were my primary involvements.
So what started your interest in Phi Alpha?
I don't know. My first 2 years on campus, I was sort of rigidly anti-Greek. Mm-hmm. For no good particular reason, just because I was kind of rigid, and so I didn't participate in that. Spent most of my time studying to try to make sure I could get this physics thing done. One of my best friends that I met, he was a year ahead of me, came to me and said, there's a new fraternity being started, and I think you'd like some of the guys that are getting this thing together. And so I went to a meeting and thought this might be the time to do this, and so I did.
Did you hold any positions later on?
I was the president of the fraternity my senior year.
And what was that like, taking on a leadership position?
Well, it was amazing because this was a brand new fraternity. There were 13 founding fathers, and we didn't have a house. We didn't have anything. We didn't have anywhere to meet. So, in the summer between my junior and senior year, I became the president of the fraternity, and we found a house over on Virginia that the university owned, and they were willing to let us live in. And so we went to town and painted the entire interior of this house, refinished the wood floors, and then we went out and raised money that summer from SAE alumni in Oklahoma City to furnish the fraternity house. And when fall rush came, we had one of the nicest facilities on campus in terms of fraternities, because we were very successful in raising money from the OCU, or from the Oklahoma City SAE alums. And I think of all my experiences at college, that year at getting that fraternity started, raising money to furnish the house, recruiting the first pledge class, provided me with a really important, some important leadership lessons that I've used the rest of my life.
So how many did you recruit for your pledge class?
I think our first pledge class probably had 10 pledges in it, somewhere in that range.
And how many did you start off with?
We started with 13.
Okay. All right. So how was it compared, going from something where you were against Greek life to being in an entire Greek life?
You know, I wasn't necessarily against Greek life. Mm-hmm. I was just sort of stubbornly remaining independent. A couple of things that sort of, I think, maybe changed my mind was that the girl that I was pursuing on campus was a member of a sorority. And during our 4 years, she spent 1 year deeply engaged with not engaged to, but engaged with a member of the Kappa Alpha fraternity, and I thought, well, maybe becoming a little bit Greek might not be a bad idea, and it worked.
Yeah. So who was this girl that you?
This girl was Mary Ann Brown. She was a young lady from Albuquerque, New Mexico, who came here to study mathematics. I met her the first week of class. We were both in a calculus class together. And she was charming and beautiful and smart. And she, at the end of that semester, had the only A in the class. And I was really impressed. So I decided maybe if I dated her, maybe I'd get an A next semester. Bring that B up to an A.
So how long did it take for y'all to start dating exactly?
Oh, we started dating at the end of our freshman year.
Yeah.
And we dated for a couple of months at the end of our freshman year. Saw her a couple of times in the summer. And then when we got back to school in September, she decided to look at other opportunities. And so we both dated other people for our sophomore and junior year. At the end of our junior year, we began dating again and got engaged that summer.
Wow.
And got married the day after graduation in May of '70.
So how was that?
I was
being in a relationship.
You know, it was remarkably, it was good. It was a time for me of maturing, growing up, understanding that being in a relationship was required maturity, that you were to find someone to marry that you needed because you wanted them, and vice versa, rather than being enmeshed and feeling like you couldn't be someone without them. Mm-hmm. We both learned our sophomore and junior years that we could be someone else without each other. But there was something there that at the end of our junior year we reconnected and found, and we were married 38 years until her death.
Wow. Let's see. So, for the OCU scene during that time, were you a big entertainer? Like, did you go see entertainment a lot? Did you go to 23rd Street? What was it like?
So, 23rd Street was in a was beginning to decline at that time. 23rd Street was a big shopping district in the early 60s. The 1960 to 1965 was, as compared to 66 to 70, was as different as maybe the 20s with the 40s in Oklahoma City, probably in the nation. Some things to try to sort of give you a background of what OCU was like when I was here. In the spring of 1965, I was a senior in high school. The United States, by the time I graduated, by the time I was through with my junior year, we had 125,000 soldiers in Vietnam. I came to school here in the fall of '66, and by January of '66, we had 400,000 soldiers in Vietnam. And the federal government told all the students, all the college students in America, all the males, you don't have a deferment. You have to earn a deferment. Everyone's available for the draft unless you score in the top quartile of this exam we're going to give everyone. You can take that, and if you score in this top quartile, you can get a deferment. Or if you finish your year of college this year in the top quartile of your class, you can get a deferment. So the pressure to stay out of harm's way in Vietnam was tremendous. By 1967, not only were we embroiled in Vietnam, but the civil rights movement was in full swing. The faculty at Columbia University, 400 faculty at Columbia University that year, sent the President of the United States a letter requesting that he stop bombing North Vietnam. In 1968, Robert Kennedy, in the fall, announced he was a candidate for the presidency. By the summer, he was dead. Martin Luther King Jr. at age 39 was murdered that year in Memphis, Tennessee. The Summer of Love was in full swing in San Francisco in '68. The sexual revolution had exploded across America in the middle of my college career. At the Miss American pageant in 1968, Gloria Steinem showed up with a bunch of other women. And it's a myth that they burned their bras. There was no fire, but they threw bras and girdles and cosmetics into a trash can outside the Miss America contest. So you have this conflation of a war that was very unpopular, that no one wanted. The civil rights movement, it was clear to us that this treatment of African Americans was absolutely immoral. A sexual revolution occurring all around us. These little Methodist kids from rural Oklahoma were just faced with a whole new lifestyle. The marijuana culture was blossoming simultaneously. And so being a guy who's pretty gregarious and pretty interested in connecting with what's going on, I went into all of that with full force. And I was committed to graduating. I was committed to doing well academically because it was my only way out of a rural existence. But I also knew that I had to connect with this anti-war movement, with this civil rights movement. I quit being so rigid and became a flaming liberal. And I just can't say enough about my 4 years here. It was just the best.
So what were some examples of ways that you chose to connect?
There was an underground newspaper on campus, the name of which I can't remember, but my friends in the dorm, these very, very bright students, would request articles for this, and they were protest articles. So we were writing articles protesting against virtually everything that was institutional in America at the time, and I loved that. I just absolutely loved this idea of resisting the way life is supposed to be, and so I connected with the anti-war movement, I connected with the civil rights movement, I connected with all sorts of change.
How was the African American community here during that time?
We had, I don't know what the percentage of students was. It was a very odd campus though. 40% of the students, when I was here, 40% of the students came from east of the Mississippi River. OCU was at that time a Division I basketball school, and so we had a really good basketball team with a lot of All-Americans on it, and there were really good African American basketball players here. I don't know, the African. I grew up in a town where there was no African American in my community, so I didn't know any when I got here. I had lots of good African American friends on campus, grew to love them dearly, and I think that's probably why besides the fact that the way this group of people were being treated in America and had been treated for 300 years was immoral. It was just the right thing to do.
Were drugs anything on campus?
Drugs, well, it was interesting. I'd never heard of marijuana when I got to OCU. There was a kid in my dorm my freshman year who went to prison for selling marijuana. And I mean, one day he was in the dorm and the next day he was gone to prison, And the sound of that word just was sort of scary to me. I thought, well, I don't even know what it is. I don't know what it would do to you if you tried it. That was my freshman year. I mean, by my senior year, it was probably, the use of marijuana, casually on campus was pretty common. It was still hard to come by and difficult to find because it was so illegal, and the reaction to it by law enforcement was dramatic. So, but in 3 years, it sort of became something that was accepted and done.
Mm-hmm. What about alcohol?
Alcohol was always accepted and done. It was illegal to have it on campus. It was illegal to have it in your dorm or your fraternity house. But there were lots of opportunities. There was a bar just off campus over on Pennsylvania called the Keg that we would commonly go to. And alcohol was commonly used.
So did you commonly use it?
Sure. I commonly did everything I could.
Yeah. Okay, what about classes?
The thing about the classes here that I remember fondly is I really thought that my education in physics was sound. My education in mathematics was sound. One of the things that I grew to appreciate over the years was the liberal arts requirement. We had a probably a little bit stronger general education liberal arts requirement than the school currently has, but that's a nationwide movement away from liberal arts. And I'm pretty sure that this focus on the liberal arts, for me, had a major effect later in my life.
How?
I figured out in my senior year that I wasn't supposed to be a physicist, and I figured out right before I graduated that I should probably go to medical school. And I wound up in medical school a year later, and through the years, I figured out that the liberal arts education is remarkably important to the physician. And I spent my life as an academic physician on the faculty over at the University of Oklahoma College of Medicine, and started a medical humanities program over there, and I still teach in it, where we require our students in medicine to study some literature and art and philosophy.
Mm-hmm. What about the professors? Are there any that you remember specifically?
Here?
Yes.
There was a philosophy professor, Wernicke, who only retired, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. He was new my junior year. He came from Northwestern. I think he had gone to undergraduate school here. He was brilliant, and he was challenging, and I took several philosophy courses from him, and absolutely loved the engagement in thought and argument that he presented. I could never make an A in his class, but he taught me to think.
President Olson,
Mm-hmm.
he died.
He died my freshman year.
Did that have an impact on campus?
It did. It did. Dr. Olson, John Olson, I think his first name was John, I believe he came here from Syracuse, and he brought transition to Oklahoma City University. The year before he came, all students on campus were required to attend chapel, at least weekly. By the time I got here in the fall of '66, that requirement was gone. He brought with him this idea of the Great Plan, scholarship. And I'm pretty sure there was no money to give these students that they brought in. I'm pretty sure there was no money. I think they just wrote off their tuition. They just called it a scholarship and wrote it off. It was transitional for this institution because I don't know how many there were. I don't know how many of these students there were. Probably not more than 20 per class. but you were in class with them, and you were at the cafeteria with them, and you were socializing with them, and they were brilliant. Mm-hmm. And so it was like, well, maybe I better get on the ball here. Maybe I'm not performing well enough. And I'm absolutely certain that just being around those people, which I think Dr. Olson brought in, I think it was his idea. Just being around those people made me better. I think he made this institution better, although he was only president for a while, and then he died of a heart attack, I think, at a young age. But I think he was transformational for the university.
So for class size, how big was your biggest class? What was it?
Oh gosh, I don't think I ever had a class over 24, 25.
And that wasn't new for you though, coming from a high school that was so small.
Right, I had 21 in my high school class, so there were always 21 in every class I had except for the upper level math and science classes where I had 4 or 5.
Do you think that was important for a learning environment?
I do.
So for culture, what type of music was present?
You know, even then, the music school was outstanding. And in there was no separate dance school. Everything was in the School of Music, and there was a big dance program because this whole idea of musical theater was a big theme in the music school at OCU. When I was in high school, my parents brought me down here and brought me to OCU and took me to a musical production of The Sound of Music. It was the first time I'd seen an orchestra in a pit, people on stage singing and dancing, and I thought I had died and gone to heaven. I thought, it doesn't get any better than this. And so I took advantage the 4 years I was here as a student at attending as much of the music and dance as I could. I just thought, it doesn't get any better. And now I go to New York a lot to see this, and it's not much better than it is here at OCU.
Wow.
In New York. And commonly you see some OCU students on stage. Mm-hmm.
So being surrounded by dancers and actors and singers, was that different for you?
Oh, totally. I was amazed. I lived in a suite my sophomore year with a student that was absolutely brilliant, just brilliant, and he was a thespian. I said, "Really? You're studying acting? You're going to act?" I mean, I couldn't wrap my mind around anything but math and science. You know, that you got to do something that produces something, and these people that were interested in art and music and acting, I thought, wow, this is new.
What about movies? Were there any significant ones you can remember?
I remember, let's see, during my college career, there were several movies that were important. Lion in Winter, I think, won the award that year, one of the years. I think 67. MASH, the movie MASH came out. The movie with Dustin Hoffman in it, where he is seduced by his mother's friend, was remarkable. The movies from 68 to 70 were remarkably different from the movies from 66 to 68. And they reflected the culture change in America.
That's how they were different?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then what other cultural things were a major difference here, do you think, as far as OCU during that time period?
I think for me, it was mostly the music school. But the culture, the American culture changes that I mentioned earlier, the war, the civil rights movement, the sexual revolution, pervaded the campus because they pervaded the entire country.
Did you meet anyone here that was extremely influential in your life?
Yes. my best friend, it was 1 year ahead of me, his name was Peter Hochla, Hochla. Peter was also a physics student. He was a kid from Bethany, and he was a Great Plains scholar. He was one of the smartest people I'd ever met. And he is a person who, we became good friends my sophomore year, his junior year. And he was willing to tell me, you're not thinking right. He was willing to say, you sound like a parrot of your parents' ideas and beliefs. You're not thinking for yourself. You're not thinking critically. And I respected him so much, I thought, wow, maybe he's right. And I began to look at the way I was approaching problems, the way I was approaching issues, and he was absolutely right. I had to loosen up, quit being so rigid, and learn some new ways of asking questions and solving problems. So he was very important. He wound up being the best man at our wedding. We got married the day after graduation in the Bishop Smith Chapel, and he was our best man. He was unfortunately killed last year in a plane crash. He was a pilot, and he was a psychiatrist in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He crashed a plane and killed himself. He was one of probably a handful of people that were really, really important to me. One of the people that was really important to my development was my wife. She was some kind of gal. I think you guys have a interview with her in this program. I think if you go through your library, you'll find Marion Brown Vannatta.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. I think she did the interview 4 or 5 years before she got sick and died.
So what's the biggest change in OCU specifically from then to now?
Probably the biggest change is the physical plant. The Minder School of Business wasn't here. The music school wasn't here. So the dance school wasn't here. About the only four things you can sort of see that were here when I was a student is the Gold Star in the administration building, the dorms, Banning and Smith Hall. Walker Hall was here. All the women lived in Walker Hall. And the Loeffler building, where the science classes are taught today, was where I went to physics courses. But everything else is transformation. This library building wasn't here. The library at that time was in the first floor of the Gold Star.
What would be your favorite change? It can be in OCU or it could be just in general from then to now.
My favorite change in this university is how excited the community has been about its survival. In the 70s, it nearly folded under financial difficulties. The community came together and said this institution is important for the community of Oklahoma City, pulled together. Donors came together and put the university back on a fairly solid financial grounding. And so I think the community support, the alumni support, the donor support has made this place a much stronger and better institution.
What about your least favorite change?
My least favorite change. Probably my least favorite change is not reflective only of Oklahoma City University. It's reflective of higher education across the country, and that is that there's been a move away from a liberal arts general education curriculum, and the faculty here have fought that, but you have significant.
Yeah.